Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Joe Emilio Show. Today is a really important show, in my opinion. So I want you guys to get your hands on that share button and that like button and start clicking away. I have a very important guest who's agreed to be on the show tonight. I'm very excited to have him on. Unfortunately, I wish it was over, how can I say, a bit more of a happier circumstance, but we're going to get into that in just a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, please, before I bring on the guest, if you're new to the channel, please like I said, and also subscribe to the channel. Also check out the Telegram channel as well. It's a Telegram channel, not group, so you won't be bombarded by weird memes and stuff like that. Just notifications of upcoming shows, just like this one. So check out that Telegram channel. Link is in the description. And then, of course, if you want to ask my guest something important, please use the super chat function. I know it's the day before payday, but hopefully, but again, if you want to, donate to the channel and also ask an important question, use that super chat function. By YouTube law, I have to address it. And I know that we are early this evening. My guest and I were early and we were like, you know what, we're ready. Let's make this happen. There's a lot to get through. And I have a lot of questions as well. And we need to raise some awareness about what is going on at the moment. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my guest and big thunderous round of applause, even though we're not going to hear it, for DA Shadow Minister of Police, Andrew Whitfield. I hope I introduced you correctly.
You did. Thanks so much, Joe. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, once again, Andrew, thank you so much for joining. Just very quickly, explain to people who you are. Okay, you're DA MP, Shadow Minister of Police. What is that? What do you do exactly?
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like we lurk around in the shadows, but it's not so ominous. It is it's a parliamentary term, official opposition, which is obviously sitting opposite the government in Parliament, and we shadow the relevant minister. So the leader of the official opposition in South Africa is John Steenhuisen, and he appoints a shadow cabinet to mirror or to shadow the president's cabinet. And so my counterpart is the Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, and I am his shadow, which he doesn't really enjoy too much. And my job is to keep him on his toes and shine a light in the dark corners that seem to him.
All right. Well, okay, we're gonna get a bit more into that, hopefully a bit later. I do have an interesting. Well, I have a question right off the bat for you. Do you do you find your job annoying? I mean, the reason why I say that is because Bheki Cele, I mean, he's not exactly the most favorable ministers in the ANC. I personally, don't like the guy, and I think he's failed the South African people on many levels. It must be tough doing what you do.
Yeah, it's a tough job, but it's a great job. I get reward from what I do, and I also get tremendous frustration, Joe. I mean, it's a really frustrating job. It's not supposed to be easy. The enjoyment I get from the job is being able to help people who've been left behind by a system which has left them behind. It's just not delivering on what it promised the people of the country. And in policing, you can imagine that some of the most vulnerable people in our country, they don't have access to lawyers, they don't have access to the resources required to get justice. And so it's my job to work hard to try and help them to achieve that justice in whichever situation they find themselves. And then obviously, my counterpart being Bheki Cele is full of its ups and downs. I try not to be too, because I think that our politics requires a level of maturity in South Africa that gives the public confidence. But it's very difficult with a guy like Bheki Cele who walks around in his funny hats and is very, he's quite callous, and he's a bit cavalier, and he shoots from the hip. He's not the most mature and responsible politician in South Africa. So I've got to try and be better than him and not stoop down to that level. It's tempting, though, I must tell you. I'd also like to wear a funny hat from time to time.
No, please don't wear a hat. That's like the worst. That's like the worst characteristic of Beketele. Like, do not wear the hat. I think I don't know if you're aware of Ramon Cabanat often calls Becky the twat in the hat, and Sichle calls Big Daddy Liberty calls him the ass hat, which I think is also appropriate. Don't get a hat. Yeah. So Dan saying I think a better term is frustrating. Yes. Sorry. Actually, that is the perfect word. Frustrating. All right. So now that I know what you do, you and some other MPs, not just DA MPs, but also EFF and Freedom Front Plus MPs, I've seen in recent months have been talking about this topic, and let's get right into it, is the current situation South Africa finds itself in, and specifically SAPS and the forensic labs, is this DNA backlog. Now, let's put some context to this for our viewers that may not be aware of this. When we say DNA backlog, explain to people the gravity of that situation.
So, I mean, I'm glad that you've provided context, that it was a really great team effort that has helped us to elevate this issue into the public domain. But, you know, I must pat myself on the back a little bit, because it was very lonely for a long time, Joe. I couldn't get anybody's attention, and I couldn't understand why nobody thought this was an important story. I thought I was going crazy. And you know, back to Dan's comment, it was the most frustrating part of my 12 years in politics, that such a critical issue was not getting the attention that it deserved, even from my own colleagues in Parliament. And so, you know, it was really a letter that I sent to the National Police Commissioner in June of 2019 about the lack of availability of sexual assault evidence collection kits at police stations. Where sexual assault occurs, there is a kit, and the police are supposed to have this kit available. That's really what kicked off the investigation. And so, well, if that's one end of the value chain that is dysfunctional, what is the processing end of that value chain? What does it look like? What are the problems? And people started contacting me, and we started to uncover the fact that this backlog was growing exponentially. And in the third quarter of that financial year, we saw a massive decline in the performance of the forensic laboratories in their ability to process DNA case exhibits at the labs. Now, the implications of that are that, you know, thousands and thousands of victims of the most heinous crimes in South Africa are left without justice or recourse to justice, and their perpetrators are let back onto the streets because they cannot be held forever. And so we saw this decline in the performance, kept on raising it, working together with my colleagues, and we managed to get this onto the agenda in Parliament, and ultimately have the debate that we had a couple of weeks ago, and really get the country talking about it. Because, you know, it's young children, it's farmers, it's farm workers, it's rural communities, it's gogos, it's people who, and the families of victims that are left without any answers or any justice when the DNA system is dysfunctional as it is at the moment.
And how did we even get to this point? I mean, in your research and following up and finding about all this stuff, is it budget cuts? Is it just corruption? Is it, you know, I'm tired of hearing everything being blamed on corruption, but I mean, yeah, how did we get here?
Yeah, well, where there's smoke, there's fire, Joe, and where the ANC, there's corruption. And, you know, I don't want to simply put it on corruption, but I mean, there's certainly an extremely high level of incompetence and just poor management, which is, you know, it's a systemic issue in government where over many years, the right people for the job have not been appointed, and people have been promoted into positions that are way beyond their capability. And so from supply chain to the laboratories and the police management, all of these things need to come together with institutional experience and memory to make the system work. And when you take people out of that system and you put new people in and they're not properly trained or qualified, you start to see, so it's not necessarily always corruption, it's just incompetence, bad management, and cadre deployment, which ultimately erodes the foundation of the civil service, which you know, how can I put it? I mean, I met a lobbyist in the States once when I was working in the state Senate in Massachusetts, and he said, us lobbyists are like the oil that keeps the wheel turning of government because it's so complex. Well, good people in government are the ones that actually keep the wheels turning. And what we saw was supply chain became dysfunctional, contracts were not renewed. And in many instances, when contracts are not renewed in government, it's because somebody's waiting to find a friend who supplies that service or that product. And so that's where the suspicion comes in around corruption. The minister himself said there has been corruption in the past. But it's beyond that. It's not just corruption. It's just pure and unbridled incompetence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you bring up the whole contract thing, because that's what I know a lot about that side of or that aspect of it rather. That in June last year, basically FDA, who has basically a system that catalogs evidence, and they also have a firearm system that catalogs the firearms and stuff like that. They switched off their system because basically SAPS wasn't paying for the system. And this had, even before June 2020, as I'm sure you're aware, this was a long battle. Apparently, FDA and SAPS went to court 9 times. The court told SAPS to pay, and they had the money. Treasury gave them the money. They still didn't pay. It's been this long battle, and it's appalling, really. I mean, this is not a system that, is not necessary for basically holding up the law. This is a very, 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 very important system, and for the SAPS to just ignore it 9 times from the court is outstanding to me. What do you know about the FDA and all this stuff that's happening on that side?
Well, I think that's the big problem. We don't know enough about, what is the internal political battle between this company and SAPS and the minister, and why was the minister interfering in these administrative issues where the National Police Commissioner was going to sign the contract with FDA and was told not to by the minister. These are revelations that came out in the committee, and one can only imagine that there are political reasons or motivations for it, which is really unfortunate, because when politics interferes in our criminal justice system to the extent that it now has created a dysfunctional DNA or forensic laboratory situation, we've got some very serious problems to worry about. I mean, I don't know Keith Keating. I don't know him personally. He's the CEO or MD of FDA. I know that they've been to court. I know that SAPS has received a lashing from the courts on a number of occasions. But I also know that SAPS has decided to go and develop its own system with the State Information Technology Agency. They've developed their own tracking and tracing and cataloging system. And, there were some comments in the media by FDA to say, well, we've taken note of that, but we believe that SAPS may still be using our intellectual property and we may just see them in court. So I don't think this is the end of the legal battles between SAPS and the FDA. But on the 6th of April, SAPS went live with their own track and trace system. Between June last year and the 6th of April, I suppose this year, they were operating a manual system, which was what they used to use. So the manual system works absolutely perfectly. Nothing gets lost. There were lots of stories about DNA samples being lost, and it's like really scary stuff. I went to the forensic laboratories in Pretoria. I spoke to the head of the forensics division, the DNA lab. They explained the system to us. As a committee, we were satisfied that the system, while not ideal because it's much slower, and if the system is slower, it obviously you can't process the case exhibits in the time that you need to. So that does contribute to the backlog, but the biggest contribution to the backlog was the contracts, not for the system necessarily, but actually for the consumables required to process the DNA. So gloves, swabs, buccal swabs, reagent chemicals to test the DNA, the calibration of the machines, Joe. I mean, they let the contracts expire for highly sophisticated machines that need to be maintained and calibrated on an ongoing basis to perform. And if you can't do that, you can't run DNA through those machines. And so they just said sitting still while the samples are backlogged up in the corridors of the laboratories.
Yes, I know in the interview that you were in Africa, Newsroom Africa, you said, or also at the National Assembly, I believe you said from January and February this year, not one sample was processed. Is that due to the consumables?
Yeah, so I mean, was it in March? One of our first portfolio committees this year, I asked the question. I said, "Well, how many since November last year?" So just to take you back to November quickly, November last year, SAPS came and presented a turnaround plan, which we unanimously as a committee said, "Oh, this is ridiculous. It's not realistic. We don't believe you're going to be able to achieve it." But what was interesting in that meeting was they said, "Look, the DNA backlog is 117,000 case exhibits, okay, which was a horrific number at the time." In March this year, when asked the question, well, what is the current backlog? And they say, oh, well, it's 190,000 or 180,000 because we weren't able to process not a single DNA case exhibit in January and February. The entire system had shut down. And that was, again, not just the FDA contract, but a whole range of issues that created this sort of perfect storm for to be fair to our professional staff there, some amazing forensic scientists who are incredibly frustrated. It's not their fault. Yeah. It's the politicians. Some politicians, not all of us. But I mean, some of them wearing hats more specifically.
Yeah. It's scary, but literally the law was just at a standstill, and all these people, these victims of sexual abuse and murder and all these horrific crimes, any crime that involves DNA basically, have yet to see justice for almost 2 years, I believe, and it's quite appalling. But before we get into that, I just want to step back a second. So we did hear a headline because you mentioned something very interesting earlier. You said that actually no DNA or no evidence has been lost, but this was actually quite a big stir in the media, and the media made a very big. They said 8 million evidence has been lost. So where did that headline come out of?
Well, I think I actually don't know where it came from, but I think what happens is that it is such a complex system that we don't all understand. We're not all experts in it. We try our best to understand, and I think that I think that somebody just imagined that if the system goes down, well, then you lose all this evidence. But the system is, I mean, the way they explain it, when a case exhibit arrives at the laboratory, a police officer brings it in. It gets logged into the system. There's a manual record of that. The entire process is logged manually and electronically. And so if the system goes down, there's no way that you're going to be able to lose the evidence. The evidence is still at the laboratories. It's tagged, it's stored, it's filed. I was very impressed with the professionalism of the expert staff at the laboratories, the manner in which the administration is run there. Their only problem is that they're so overwhelmed by all of these case exhibits that presents a risk in the future as to, do they have the capacity to maintain these logs as more and more come in while they're operating on short staff because of COVID. So they're not even operating at full capacity. I think it's 75% capacity at the moment because of COVID. So that's another thing slowing the whole process down. And the Minister of Police has told us that, don't worry, guys, we'll deal with the backlog in 18 months' time. Well, Joe, it's not like every day there aren't new case exhibits arriving at the laboratories. So effectively, you're dealing with the backlog on the one hand, but you've got current case exhibits that are coming in. Now, Are you not dealing with those? Are you only dealing with the backlog? It's like the firearm amnesty applications. I don't know if you saw the photos online. They deal with the ones at the top of the pile, not the first ones that came in at the bottom. And so the backlog is not going to be dealt with in 18 months, as far as I can see. They've thrown a lot of money at it, and I take my hat off to SAPS for that. I really hope and I believe that they can resolve it sooner than 18 months. But even 18 months is ridiculous. It's just way too long. Yeah. I mean, why should anybody wait another 18 months after they've waited 2 years?
Exactly. No, I agree with that. And look, I'm very skeptical when it comes to ANC promising anything with a timeline because, Cyril in 2018 said, oh, in 2 years' time, load shedding will be a thing of the past. So that didn't work out too well.
He also said he's going to halve violent crime in his first term of office. Well, violent crime is on the rise. And if you want to solve violent crime, there have got to be consequences for criminals. And the best way to have consequences for criminals is to make sure your forensic science laboratories are operating properly. That's the swiftest, cleanest, quickest, verifiable justice you can get. And if that's not working, criminals have got a license to continue to assault and commit heinous crimes in our country with impunity.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, because it reminds me of I read a very sad story the other day, and I mean, it's one of, like we said, thousands at the moment of cases that are unsolved or in the backlog, is the one of Chantal Makwene, who was, I believe, a 5-year-old, if I'm not mistaken, 5-year-old girl, viciously attacked and sexually assaulted. Tell us more about that case.
Well, Chantal was, as you say, viciously and violently attacked, sexually assaulted, and killed by a man who was out on bail for sexual assault of an elderly woman. And he was out on bail because they couldn't prosecute him because they didn't have sufficient evidence. Which evidence do you think they didn't have? Well, the DNA. They weren't able to match the DNA because the system is so backlogged. And so he was released on bail. He went ahead and violently assaulted Chantal Mokoena, a little child, a little girl who had her whole life in front of her. Granted, living in a very difficult circumstance in a very poor community, but nonetheless, that shouldn't be a determining factor in how safe somebody should feel as a child. That they would be so brutally attacked and murdered. And this gentleman was arrested and then released, and he was out on bail. And they obviously couldn't link the previous crime to the current crime because they couldn't even process Chantal and his DNA in order to convict him prosecute him successfully. And so what ended up happening was, after a huge amount of frustration, the mother, together with some community members, went and caught him and castrated him, and beat him up and sort of real harsh vigilante justice, because the system is failing. And when the system fails, this is what happens. People take the law into their own hands, which is also not acceptable. But what is really, really, really sad is that Chantal Mokwena's mother had an infant. I mean, she was breastfeeding her young child, and she was arrested and thrown into prison and separated from her young child, while Chantal's, the gentleman who, the violent criminal, sorry, I didn't call him a gentleman, the violent criminal who assaulted and killed Chantal was still walking free. Now, when people see that kind of justice, that kind of uneven justice, the system, that the lack of trust they have in the system becomes greater, and eventually, the system collapses under the weight of that distrust. And that's what's happened in the Chantal case and many other cases because of this backlog. And, this is probably one of it's a sad story, but it's an important story because it really highlights the importance of getting the system working properly and never allowing it to get to this state ever again. I mean, the backlog, Joe, is now at nearly 250,000. It's over 225,000. So it's getting worse and worse.
Yeah, Becky. Well, first, let me say, hearing that story of Chantal is very scary, and this is what has frustrated me from the beginning since I heard about this backlog. And I'm sure a lot of my viewers on this channel may get sick and tired of me talking about it, but I feel if we don't talk about it, we're doing an even greater injustice to those victims and to the people of South Africa. I mean, and I truly believe this, if we have a failing law system in a country, wherever country you are, whether it's here, whether it's States, Europe, wherever you live, if your government cannot protect its people, that is a serious, 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 serious situation to be in. You know, and this again, like you said, this is what happens. This is what happens when there's no longer any trust, when there's no system to protect people. They take law into their own hands. We see it. We saw it recently, I think a week ago, somewhere in Johannesburg. I forget the name of the place, but the residents, I think it's in Honeydew or near Honeydew. The residents went around and looked for gang members, took them to a field, and brutally murdered them because the gangs are taking over. And again, we're seeing more vigilantism happening in South Africa. And, you know, on the one hand, you're kind of like, well, you know what? I don't blame them. But on the other hand, it's like, but it's wrong. And we need our police system or the law enforcement to just, I don't know. I know it's complicated. It's easier said than done. You know, I know there's good. I've said this before on the channel in many of my videos. I know there's good cops out there. I know there's good cops that try their best every day with what they have. It's the ANC that makes it so difficult for them. Yeah. It's
I mean, you know, the really sad part of it, as you said, there's some really unbelievable police officers who it's a real calling for them, and they work hard and they're professional and they're highly skilled, trained, very smart people who are doing such important work out there. But they're becoming increasingly the minority in the South African police service, while the majority are poorly trained, unprofessional, dishonest. And this is now, you know, the minister always says, oh, it's just a few rotten apples. And I keep reminding him the whole barrel is rotten. You know, if your barrel's rotten, all the apples are going to rot. And so the barrel is the ANC government, and the apples are the police officers, many of whom have become victims of a system which they think is normal. You know, that it's normal to be corrupt, and it's normal to, you know, behave like this, and it's completely unacceptable. And as you say, when the criminal justice system fails, people apply mob justice, which is a very, very dangerous situation for us to be in. No matter how much sympathy people may have with those communities, it's just not acceptable. And what is the worst part of all of it is that SAPS cuts 3.8 billion rand from visible policing in its budget for the new financial year, which is literally the frontline officers that are out there every day, boots on the ground, you know, the thin blue line, you know, holding things together. At that, but give more money to VIP protection, which is the, you know, the protection that looks after the ministers. So it's quite perverse, quite honestly. The prioritization of this government is just completely backwards. And as citizens of the country, I think we feel a little bit alone out there.
Absolutely. I do want to talk to you about, the firearm situation. But before we get into that, I just want to quickly ask you about SITA. I've been getting some interesting feedback about SITA, saying that, you know, there's no biometrics in SITA, which is very important, because if there's no biometrics, it does create room for a bit of dishonesty, if I can put it that way. So is SITA, do you think SITA has produced a system that is going to solve the problem?
So I'm a bit of a techno cripple, Joe. I mean, you're a techno savvy guy. You know, you've got all the gadgets there, and you can make this all happen. And it's an amazing show. Well done to you. I don't want to comment on the details of SITA. I don't know enough about it. I'll certainly look into it a little more. The backlog problem is not going to be solved by SITA. It's not going to be solved by SITA and the system alone. It has to be solved by getting proper contract management in place and ensuring we have proper leadership in our forensics division, because that's the other problem. We've had leadership vacuums in the SAPS forensics division and in the biology unit at the forensic laboratories. So, there's a leadership and management crisis, there's a contract management crisis, and all of that leads to a lack of consumables, low staff morale, which leads to low productivity. And so, it is a very complex situation. I would say that the issues that SITA, the system that SITA has developed, is probably going to come under increased scrutiny, because FDA don't seem to be wanting to back down from this fight. In fact, I think they're probably more energized than ever before to pick that fight, and we'll see what happens. It's been since the 6th of April. I haven't read anything new on any developments between FDA and SAPS, but I'm certain that there's going to be more legal challenges for SAPS down the line.
Okay, that's fair enough. But I will hold you to it. Maybe I'll have you back in a few months' time, and you can tell us all about the updates with SITA and everything else. I'm sure you'll keep a close eye on it as well. All right, let's move forward. There's something that I wasn't really planning on chatting to you about, but seeing as you are the shadow minister of the police, and recently I saw someone comment earlier about it. The firearm. I'm sure you've seen it everywhere now. This new bill that wants to, I think it's a bill that wants to be passed about basically you cannot claim self-defense when you apply to get a firearm. You're obviously aware of this one.
Yes. Yeah,
yes. I've released. Do you have anything to comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, Joe. It's almost exhausting to have to deal with something like this, because it's so irrational in the context in which we have to survive in South Africa. And I say survive quite seriously, because I'm very fortunate. I can afford private security and various things, but most South Africans can't. They depend on SAPS. SAPS is broken. Many of those people would choose to have a firearm for self-defense. Why should they not have that right to choose to have a firearm? I choose not to have one for self-defense. That's my personal choice. But I know many people who do choose, and I think they should have that choice. I have released some very strongly worded statements since Sunday about this issue. I've done a lot of interviews on it. I'm more determined than ever to pick a fight with the minister over this issue. He's made his views very clear over a number of years. He wants to rid society of guns. He just doesn't want to rid his protection detail of their guns. So he's quite happy for his protection detail to be heavily armed to keep him safe, but he wants to come into the homes of ordinary South Africans and take their guns. And he's going to be facing a fight on all fronts. I think civil society, certainly myself and a couple of colleagues on the portfolio committee will be fighting that battle. We're launching a petition tomorrow as the DA, calling on people to submit their names to the petition so that I can deliver it to the Speaker of Parliament, and we can have we really thrash this out properly in Parliament and demonstrate how many people are actually opposed to this. And it cuts across all demographics. And there's a strange misconception that gun ownership is a white issue. It's absolutely not. Many of my black and colored colleagues have firearms. Some of my white colleagues have firearms, and they have them for personal protection and self-defense. And let's be honest, Joe, self-defense in the current context of violent crime and where SAPS is literally the last line of defense that we have in South Africa in many instances. And so we're going to be putting up a big fight, Joe. I'm really concerned about this. There are a lot of other issues in the bill. I don't want to get lost on just self-defense, but I mean, certainly that is the most alarming component that has triggered a huge emotional outcry. And so we're looking carefully at the whole bill, and we'll be putting out a comprehensive plan to tackle that bill.
Okay. I'm glad to hear it. And you have my name on that petition. So as soon as you have it, send it to me. I will then release a video on it and get more and basically raise more awareness about it. And people need to it's you deal with one thing, right? Like you're dealing with the DNA backlog, and now this comes up, and there's other issues as well. I'm sure you're an extremely busy man.
Yeah, busy is an understatement, and I was thinking about it today. It's taken me 2 years to get the DNA issue to where it is now, and the firearm thing comes along, and then of course, you're dealing with all sorts of other issues. You've got constituents whose cat stuck in a tree, or whatever the issue is. There's a pothole. Somebody wants a pothole fixed. Why aren't you fixing my pothole? And so, yeah, it's an incredibly frustrating job, but as I said, it's really rewarding, and I really wouldn't be doing anything else. Our country needs more and more, I think, good people out there who are prepared to get involved in this fight. And I know it's messy. Politics in South Africa is really messy, but if I could use this as like a shout out to as many people, please, join us in the fight and come and be part of politics in South Africa. And there is hope. I wouldn't do this if I didn't believe that there's light at the end of the tunnel, Joe. We just have to persevere. We cannot give up. And I'm not prepared to give up yet.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Speaking about you mentioned earlier, parliament and talking parliament, and like I said to you off air, I watched your National Assembly, which I think your speech was brilliant, and the way you spoke about the DNA backlog was clear, just, and fair, and you said some pretty harsh things well, not harsh. I think. Just a bit of context for those who may not have watched it. Andrew sent emails or letters rather to the president about, the president, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, about the backlog, and apparently he's ignored you.
Yeah, I've sent at least 2 letters to him, countless other letters to the minister, but certainly 2 letters to the president on the issue. And John Steenhuisen has asked him oral questions in Parliament. So he's aware of the issue. The fact that he never responded to a member of Parliament, I mean, if that's how he treats somebody who works with him as one of 400 people in one room, how can we expect him to treat ordinary South Africans out there? I mean, he can't even respond to my letters. So clearly, either he doesn't understand the gravity of the situation, or he just doesn't think it's that important. And in fact, I thought my speech was really tame, Joe. I mean, I could have gone a lot harder. I decided not to be overly political because it's such an important issue. I wanted to land a message that would appeal to whoever, no matter who they support politically. I wanted them to hear, the facts, and I hope that came across. I didn't go after the minister as much as I would have liked to, but I thought the president needed a target on his back that day.
No, well, if you don't mind, I'll read what the one quote that you were quoted on News 24 says, "Mr. President, you have ignored my letters. You have ignored the cries of the victims of violent crime. You have ignored the failure of your minister to prevent this crisis." And at some point during the speech as well, you ended by saying, "Mr. President, you are complicit in this crisis," which I thought was perfectly said. Yeah, I think it is really good. I just wish more people watched it because it's to me it was important. Yeah, it's. I mean, some of the stuff you said in that speech was also quite alarming. Like the whole 225,000, 225, like you said, nearly 250,000. Although Beke says that it's not that amount, he says that it's 208,000. So how does he get to that number?
Potato, Joe. It's 208,000 versus 225. I've submitted some parliamentary questions. I think I'll be closer to the right answer than he will. But he's the Minister of Police, so let's use 208,000. That doesn't make it better. I mean, it actually still equally. It's just as horrific, The fact that he made that point, he's like, no, it's not 225, it's 208, as though, he's winning the war. Well, he's not winning the war because it's just growing every single day. I actually sent him a note because I thought parts of his speech were actually quite good. So I sent him a note and I said, nice speech, but the proof will be in the pudding. I look forward to seeing the numbers come down, seeing the backlog actually be dealt with. Let's beat our chest when that starts to happen, not before.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with you. Whether it's 208 or 225, I mean, it's You know what? It's one backlog too much. That's what it is. There shouldn't be any backlog. So I'm sorry. I just want to address this comment here. Digital Lex saying I need to ask you a question. I will leave the final 10 minutes, 15 minutes for questions. So just Digital Lex, remember that. Copy and paste it for later. So cool. I wanted to also ask you. So we spoke about the firearms. We spoke about, pretty much a lot about the backlog, which again, I do want to stress a lot about, because it is an important topic. And we were talking about the National Assembly in your speech. I wanted to know this National Assembly. Can you explain what the point of it was? I mean, I get that you went and you spoke in Parliament and you're making it more aware and stuff, but like, what happens after that? I mean, are we going to see some progress? Is it just a way to pressure the government? What has anything happened since your speech? Enlighten us.
Yeah. So it's a really good question. So, I mean, in terms of the rules of Parliament, which are, not everybody reads, not the most, certainly for politicians, a must read. In terms of the rules of Parliament, you can request a debate of urgent national importance, right? So in order to get a debate onto the order paper of Parliament, you would submit a notice of motion you in Parliament, and then the political parties would decide which topic is going to be debated. I submitted a request for an urgent debate of national importance, because I felt that this was an issue that should be elevated to that level. And it was really a test of whether the ANC would concede that this is actually an issue of national importance. Otherwise, it sort of stays in the committee, if that makes sense, Joe. So it doesn't really into the chamber in the kind of prominence that it deserves. And that's what that debate did. It put it front and center on the national agenda. I have never done more media interviews in my life than I did in those 48 hours, because people were just blown away. So it achieved a very important thing that I hadn't been able to achieve for about 18 months, because nobody wanted to listen to me, and I was going crazy thinking I'm barking up the wrong tree. But finally, there was this rallying cry in the public domain, which was a massive victory. That's the first thing. Secondly, I know that the president got feedback from that speech. So, obviously my message landed on his desk that he's complicit in this crisis. And the other thing is that, the week after that, we went to the forensic laboratories in Pretoria. So we actually went to ground zero, if I can call it that, to go and see and talk to the people involved to get a better understanding of how the system works as politicians, and how does the system work? We're talking to scientists and experts in the field, police officers. And the biggest victory is that the committee is unanimous on this issue. We might fight over small details, but I mean, politically, there's no partisan politics on this issue. We want to get it solved. I'm not going to be complacent about that. I don't trust the ANC as far as I can throw them. So I really do want to keep up the pressure. So going to the laboratories was important. I need to get to the Cape Town laboratories. We went to Pretoria. I now need to get to the Cape Town laboratories. I'm talking to, experts in the field of DNA, civil society organizations, gender-based violence, groups, trying to get them more excited about championing this issue together with me. And ultimately, it's up to the minister to make the change happen, Joe. And, that's where the greatest frustration in opposition politics comes. I will do whatever I can within my power, but I'm not the minister. I'm just the shadow. And, as long as I'm the shadow, I can appeal to the ministers, appeal to the minister. I can appeal to the president. We can talk, we can debate. But at the end of the day, they've got to fix the system, and that's what they say they're doing. So I'm very impressed with the turnaround plan that we now have, and the funding that has gone with it. Some contracts have been renewed, so there is some progress. But I'm still a bit doubtful about whether or not they're going to be able to achieve the turnaround that they think they're going to achieve in the period that they think they're going to do that, which is 18 months. I think it's going to take much longer. Something much more drastic needs to be done. And that's why we actually proposed, Joe, sorry to just the last thing, we actually proposed to outsource the reference index samples. So there's crime index, and you've got to be very careful with those. And then there's reference index. Outsource what you can to private laboratories or to university laboratories under, an MOU, where they can then deal with part of your backlog. And I don't know why they're dragging their feet on that. They just don't seem to be. There doesn't seem to be the urgency required to deal with the situation.
Yeah, see, you sound very optimistic, which is not bad. It's just, I don't know. I think me and, a lot of South Africans may feel this way. Like, it's hard and difficult to see the hope. And while your efforts are greatly appreciated, don't get me wrong, men like you and ministers like you and men and women like you, we need you in our society, to keep up the pressure and check and make sure everything's happening. But Andrew, I gotta be honest, man. Sele has basically ignored 9 court orders. I've watched some of those committee meetings. He has 1,000 excuses as to what's happening. I mean, he even said like one found out about it by chance. How? You're the police minister.
Yeah.
How do you find out about it by chance? That's BS. No. I mean, you're just proving your incompetence for your own job, really, is what you've done. Yeah. But with that kind of attitude that he has, like, and he says, when he's under the spotlight, he says all the right things, of course. But I mean, just the other day, I believe it was the police commissioner, someone said that the police are stretched beyond their means. They can't keep up with anything. It's a worrying situation. And honestly, I think you as being part of the opposition and stuff, I understand, like you just said, there's eventually a ceiling that you hit, but surely there must be something in the law, in the Constitution, I don't know, you would know better than I would, that can allow you to kind of, I don't know, overstep, do something to say, hey, you know what, say that you're not doing your job, like almost like a mutiny, if I can put it that way, but not violent, just, because we can't keep on living like this. You know what I mean?
Well, it's called elections, Joe. That's where the mutiny happens. That's where the overthrow has to happen. And I know, it's the political answer, but it's actually the honest answer. That's the mechanism. That's the rule. That's what exists in the law in order to change the situation, whether you vote for the DA or not, or whatever. I mean, people have not, in my opinion, fully embraced the opportunity that elections present in this country. I mean, we've got a very small percentage of people who actually register to go out and vote, and then people don't turn out and vote on election day. And so we have to play the hand that we dealt. And in that situation, it does make things difficult for all of us. And I get it. I get where you're coming from. I have dark days, Joe. I struggle to see the light some days, but it's always there. And I have to believe the minute I stop seeing the light is that I've got to get out of politics. I've got to go and do something else, because how can I encourage you to believe if I don't believe, right? And I must tell you, going to the forensic laboratories in Pretoria the other day gave me such hope, Joe. I mean, in spite of all this chaos, I met some of the most unbelievable people who are doing the most world-class work. I mean, it sounds so weird because it's in such a state of chaos at the moment, but we are world-renowned for our national DNA forensic database. We are renowned for our legislation. And that's a whole nother topic for another discussion. But I mean, the minister has been sitting on an amendment bill for a good few years now. It's a complex issue, but I mean, basically it's a bill that's required in order to ensure that all our convicted Schedule 8 offenders can be compelled to submit their DNA to the convicted Schedule 8 offenders database. And at the moment, you can't compel them to do that. That bill is outstanding for 4 years or so. And the reason that the ANC give us is because, no, they don't want to go ahead with it because they're busy exploring actually doing a national DNA database for all citizens. So, I mean, that's the kind of crazy thinking that's going on inside the ANC. And so you want to talk about mutiny. Let's talk about the 27th of October, when people can really send a message to government and say, you know, you guys have lost the plot. Expropriation without compensation. You want to take away firearms for self-defense. You can't manage the forensic laboratories. You're defunding the police and funding the VIPs. And now you want to take out DNA of every single citizen in the country, which is obviously unconstitutional and completely unaffordable. To do what with? Exactly. Like this weird dystopian world that we now, you know, sort of starting to live in, where they actually, he's not even embarrassed to tell us that he wants to take the DNA of every South African citizen, put it on a database. I mean, it's just bizarre.
I wouldn't even know. I mean, I don't even think South Africa or ANC, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, home affairs, has every single ID or every single South African on the ID database. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people that live here that aren't even on that system. So how he's going to get everyone to give their DNA, I have no idea. It's near to impossible. I mean, it makes sense though that bill you mentioned about the ones that are convicted and they need to give their DNA and stuff like that. I remember you mentioned that again in National Assembly, and you said that it's been, sorry, you said 4 years now that they've been sitting on it?
Yeah, it's been about 4 years. So the original act had a transitional provision in the act, and it expired in 2017. And since then, no convicted offender could be compelled to submit their DNA sample or profile.
And that means that, is that like, so if I'm, let's say I'm convicted of a offense, and now that I'm in jail, I don't have to give my DNA. So that, is that DNA required to convict them?
So you'll remember from the speech, I used the example of Sikangele Mki, who was arrested for assault. They took his DNA, and when they put it through the system, so he was originally sentenced a 5-year suspended sentence, right? So he was going to walk free with a 5-year suspended sentence from the court. And because his DNA was put through the convicted offender counts of rape and 12 counts of robbery and, of sexual assault, just a really horrible man who ended up serving 20 life sentences plus 30 years or something. So that's the power of DNA, that's the power of the database. Yes. And that's the power of legislation. What I'm worried about is and I'm now asking these questions, is if you can't force them to submit their DNA profile and they get a good attorney, does that mean that the DNA profile is not on the DNA database?
Sorry, guys. There we go. Sorry, I think we had a bit of a connection issue there. If you, we lost you at when you were explaining the guy that was convicted and got 20 consecutive life sentences.
Yeah, so I was just making the point. That's why the DNA and the database is just so important, and why this legislation is so important. And we have to get it through Parliament.
So basically, he was convicted on something else. He gave his DNA, which was discovered at another crime that he had done, and he got convicted for that crime, basically.
Yeah, multiple other crimes. It was
multiple
tremendous
crimes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that is important. I think, again, the power of DNA. All right. Well, we're closing off soon, so I'm going to open the floor for some questions. So for those of you that have any questions for Andrew, please get them ready and start posting them, and I'll have a look at them. And as you guys are doing that, as our viewers are doing that, I had a question and now I forgot. Sorry, Andrew. I'm trying to remember now. We were talking about the DNA. It completely slipped my mind now. Sorry, Andrew. If it comes back to me, I'll ask.
I'm off the hook.
It was something about. Well, okay. Well, I do have another question for you. So, you're the shadow minister, right, of police, which means, like you said, you keep Tele in check. So, if let's say the DA became, the ruling party, you would obviously still keep your position. You would then be the actual minister of police, correct?
No, not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
I might not be chosen. I might not be the best person at that time, or I might be out of favor. I mean, politics is a funny game for some people, and I'm just committed to working as hard as I can. I've always wanted to do something that makes a difference. I know that sounds cheesy, but that's why I'm here. And it's not the positions that bother me. It's the work that I do that really. That's what keeps me up at night, and that's what keeps me going.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, cool. So let's get some of these questions here. I think this is a one of two. Security companies do more than police these days, even stopping street crimes. Why not give security companies more freedom and power to help with backlogs and crime prevention?
So, I mean, private security companies do a huge amount of work for crime prevention. They do a tremendous job in South Africa. There's some very problematic private security companies, Joe. There's some sort of wild card security companies out there. They need to be very carefully monitored. And, there are regulations in place. I think they're 3 times or 4 times the number of private security officers to police officers in South Africa. It gives you an idea of how enormous that industry is. If the backlog question is about DNA, I don't think private security companies should be dealing with DNA, but certainly private laboratories, professional forensic laboratories, and university laboratories in public-private partnership with the SAPS forensics division. That is certainly a solution. And the problem, again, just with private security, is that it's not for everybody. Unfortunately, we still have millions of South Africans that are left vulnerable because SAPS is so, incapable of, as you said, fulfilling their mandate. But I take my hat off to the private security companies that keep millions of South Africans safe. They do a great job. And, Joe, this Firearms Control Amendment Bill, they're actually proposing that, semi-automatic weapons not be used in private security companies. So can you imagine? I mean, what are we going to use? An old Smith and Wesson revolver? I mean, what are they supposed to use?
But I mean, we just heard. I mean, I'm sure you saw that video that went viral of the cash in transit. It was phones that were being transported, and then those 2 brave men that were lucky to. Well, I don't know about lucky. I think they were well trained and they did what they had to do to get out of it. But I mean, they were holding semi-automatic weapons, so those guys won't be able to basically have those guns, which is ridiculous.
That's crazy.
All right. So Herman J. Ruas wants to know how many farmers' cases are lost due to this lack of evidence. I think maybe he means, are you aware if there's any, say, farm murders in the DNA backlog? And if so, do you have any idea of how many?
Yeah, I don't know that they classify them as farm murders. I'll certainly ask the question. But I am dealing with a number of queries from people who, family members of victims of farm murders, farm attacks. There are a number of cases that are delayed. The Brendan Warner case, there are many cases. Every single murder case in South Africa, I mean, not to put a finer point on it, obviously every murder is important, and the farm murders in South Africa are horrific. What is happening is really scary. Our rural communities are the most vulnerable communities, in the country. And KZN and the Eastern Cape are the biggest spike in violent crime in the latest crime statistics, and they're 2 of the most rural provinces. Yes, absolutely, there are cases. It is horrific. We need to that's why we need to get the system fixed. I mean, but yes, the short answer is yes.
All right. Digital Lex once again has a second question. He did say 1 of 2, so this is 2 of 2. Security companies will only go as far as the law allows them, and some will go beyond and face the music later. But give them more freedom and power, then they will be more comfortable to act. I think that was a continuation, sorry, of his previous thing. But I don't know if you want to comment on that. I think you more or less answered it.
Yeah, I think that's just it's an interesting point. Private security companies will only go as far as they're paid to go. That's actually the answer. So, they're private companies at the end of the day. I'm not trying to be facetious. They are private companies and they will only work for who pays them. And that's why we have to fix the police service because, Joe, I used to live in Canada, and I mean, I know what it's like to have a professional public service, a civil service, a civil service that works, that cares, nurses, doctors, teachers, police officers, volunteer firemen and women. We need to bring back that spirit of civil service in South Africa. That's what's sustainable. Or we need to grow our economy so more and more South Africans can afford private security, because that is as far as they'll go, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, good answer. All right. So one more, I think. Yeah, I think this is the last question. Yanni Vanderpalt asking, wait, no, that's not the one. Where is it? I saw it earlier. I know he sent a question. There we go. Is the DA worried about the ANC pushing out the voting in October? Is there a risk of it being cancelled?
Not cancelled, but certainly postponed. We are worried. Let me just go back to that list, Joe. Expropriation of property without compensation, disarming law-abiding citizens, collapsing criminal justice system, and then you start to postpone elections. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, Joe, far from it, but those are just, some very worrying trends that I think would concern anybody who wants to promote a Western sort of liberal democracy. It's certainly a constitutional democracy that we live in. And once you start postponing elections, where does it end? What is the next excuse? Is there going to be a new coronavirus? Is there going to be a new this or a new that? What are the different permutations that can, as you say in virus or virology, mutations of this ANC disease that we have to deal with? I mean, what are they going to come up with next? It's very scary. We don't subscribe to a postponement of the election. We are going to put up a big fight. Helen Zille has told me that the party will prepare an enormous fight against it, because it is the foundation of our democracy, regular, free and fair elections. And that is where people can challenge the ANC for power. And that's why I said, I'm going to punt the elections again, Joe. That's why I said it's so important that if you want to overthrow a government, you've got to do it at elections, and we've got to get people excited about it. And if people don't have hope, I'm going to work on you, Joe. I'm going to give you hope. But if they don't have hope, then they don't want to vote. And if they don't want to vote, then the government never gets overthrown. But the ANC knows they can be overthrown, Joe. That's what's exciting about this postponement. If you think about it in those terms, they know they can be overthrown, because in 2016, they got the fright of their lives. They lost 3 big metros. I know what's happened since then. I was in government in one of them, and it was very difficult. But they've lost 3 big metros and a lot of ground. They're polling, I'm sure, very close to 50%, if not below that by now. So they're in a difficult situation, and we're going to push them to those elections. We've got to hold them to it.
Well, Andrew, in closing, I got one more question for you, and something that frustrates me very much. Now, I've said this many times before on my channel, and people watching are not, this is not news for them, but I am currently between 3 parties, and I'm definitely going to vote when the elections come, but I'm between 3 parties. Now, I know you're not the spokesperson of the DA and stuff like that. I know that, but one thing that annoys me about people, the general public, is, and I just want to ask you, because you're part of the DA, there seems to be this lie going around for the less informed that if the DA takes over, apartheid's going to come back and all that, which we know is not going to happen. We know this. But what would you say, to the average South African who was told that? What would you say to them?
Well, I would say to them, I could give them my own personal story. I grew up as a young child in the 1980s in South Africa, going to by-elections for the Progressive Federal Party, which was a predecessor of the DP and then the DA. And my grandfather was Helen Suzman's chief whip. My mother used to march with black South Africans to prevent police officers from shooting them. There are white and colored and black and Indian South Africans who have all worked together to fight against apartheid. And the DA has a very proud history of that. We now live in a constitutional democracy, which we never lived in before. That constitution protects us. It gives us a huge amount of security, and we need to defend it and uphold it with everything we have. I also would tell them that it was, many members of the DP who actually, including James Self and other people, who contributed to that constitution. So I hear where people are coming from. It's a very easy thing for people to believe because the ANC wants to make everything about race. If you're white, you're racist, yes. And if you're white, then therefore you supported apartheid. It's a very simplistic argument, and we need to try and get people to see the bigger picture and to see South Africans, not just for the color of their skin, but who they are and what they've done and how they contribute and how they can help. And so that's why, every time I'm able to help any South African with an issue, I hope that it helps them to form a different opinion about their fellow South Africans. This is a white South African helping a black South African, and a black South African helping a white South African, and this is the kind of country we want to live in. I wouldn't go into the whole philosophy of the party and the ideology because I think that can put some people to sleep. But I would tell them my own personal story and why I got into politics, and that the whole idea of separate development and living apart, and ethnic nationalism and mobilizing around ethnic issues and identity is so dangerous. And I worry that our country is heading in that direction, as is the world. And we need to fight against it as futile as it might seem at times, and idealistic as it might seem. It's a worthy cause to fight.
Fantastic. I love the answer. Well, really, really good answer. Yeah. So, sorry, last question, because this guy's like, last one. Will it help by integrating security companies into the government as a sub-branch of sorts of the SAPs?
Yeah, I mean, that's really creative, but I don't see how it would be legally possible. SAPS is funded by the taxpayers, private security companies. Again, they serve the interests of their clients and have that transactional relationship with their clients. But, for all intents and purposes, in many communities, mostly affluent communities, private security companies are the police. They already operate as the police to keep people safe. People phone their private security company before they phone the police. Why? Because the police don't pick up the phone. And if they do pick up the phone, it takes them, an hour or two to get to the scene of the crime, whereas the private security are there. They're there quickly. So I hadn't thought about that before. I'll dream on it tonight, Joe, and maybe I'll have an answer for the next show. But I can't see how it would be legally possible.
All right. Well, Andrew, I don't want to keep you any longer. Please stay backstage. I'll give you a proper goodbye just now. I'm just going to do a bit of a sign off. But I just want to say very quickly, thank you so much for the awesome conversation. I know it's not the happiest of conversations, but I hope that people learned something through this conversation. I hope we got more people aware of what's going on. And please share. People share this and let fellow South Africans know, and hopefully it will encourage you to, like Andrew said, you want a mutiny, go to the election polls. Do you want to say anything in closing, Andrew?
It was a great opportunity to tell the story, and it was a great opportunity to tell my story and the story of DNA and why it's so important. And I hope that your viewers will go out there and share the story, and really get more people talking about it, because it is at the heart of our criminal justice system, and we can't allow it to fail.
Absolutely. All right, Andrew, I'll chat to you just now. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Andrew Whitfield, DA Shadow Minister of the Police. Terrific guy, one hell of a job. I don't want it, but you know, someone has to do it, and I truly, truly, truly praise him for the work that he's doing. Learned a lot during this conversation. I hope it gave you a good update on the DNA backlog. We're still not quite out of the woods yet, and we need to create more awareness, and we need to keep the pressure on the ANC government. It's unacceptable where it is now. Even though things may be turning around for the better, it's unacceptable that we even got to this point. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you, all of you, for tuning in, for all the questions, for interaction. Thank you all so much. Please share this far and wide. Let people know. And I'll be back Wednesday evening. So ladies and gentlemen, if I don't see you then, stay safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you at the next one. Cheers.